Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. As you know, this is the PhD from A to Z. What we're going to do today is you're going to have an opportunity to meet some people working in research and some current PhD students. There's also myself, which is Victoria. I'm from the Career Service. I'm joined by my colleagues Elizabeth and Jenny. Elizabeth is our postgraduate careers consultant, and Jenny works with our finalists on their graduate transitions. And I work within humanities, and I'm the widening participation careers consultant working with underrepresented groups. So that's us. What I'll do now is I will hand over to Emre to introduce the panel, and then we will move into some questions and answers, some of which have been pre-submitted. Thank you for doing that. And then there'll be a short presentation on how you actually find a PhD. So I shall hand over to Emre.
Hi everyone. So yeah, today we're just going to give you a little bit of an overview about doing a PhD, what is, how you get there, what you do when you do get there. So I'm a current PhD student, so I did my undergrad here at the university, and then I came straight from that to do my PhD here as well. So a Manchester lifer, maybe they might say. And I'm just going to get everyone to quickly introduce themselves. So I'm going to go in order of how I see you on my screen, so it might be a bit strange for everyone. So, but Anika, if you want to go first, a bit about yourself, how you got to where you are, etc.
So hi everyone, I'm Anika Khan and I'm a research fellow in nuclear fusion based in Mace. I also did my PhD at Manchester and I finished in 2016. After that, I worked at a few different places. So I worked at the ITER organization, which is in France, and then at Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics, which is in Germany, and now I'm back at Manchester.
Great. And then next I have Laura, if you want to introduce yourself too.
Hi guys, thanks Emre. So I'm Laura Lay, I'm a research fellow, so I'm based at the Dalton Cumbrian facility, which is part of the University of Manchester. I now supervise PhD researchers. I completed my own PhD also at Manchester in 2013, and that was on atomistic simulation for carbon capture. So it wasn't related to the nuclear industry, but everything else I've done in my career has been nuclear related. So I now work on nuclear waste, and my research group looks at the effect of radiation on that waste, attempting to look at very long timescales associated with it. And I also used to work in the nuclear industry on Sellafield site.
Also, and then Max.
Hi everyone, I'm Max. I'm a fourth year PhD student. I'm looking at an interesting group of materials called max phasers, which I sadly didn't invent, for use in future nuclear fusion environments. I studied my undergraduate degree in physics at Leeds. I did a year in industry at TWI in Cambridge, and I'm keen on bouldering, squash, skiing, mountain climbing, sustainable energy, ale and cheese, in that order.
I did think, yeah, ale and cheese might come before some of those, Max, but that's a good dedication. And then Cara, last but not least.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cara. I have a bit of a weird title. I'm a KTP associate, which is a knowledge transfer partnership. I thought just to briefly tell people what that is. It's something which has been running for several decades, actually. It's a government-run program of bringing together collaborative projects between universities and industry partners, and people can get into actually at any level once you have a graduate from different levels of degrees. So I've went into one which purposely asked for a PhD. And I was really lucky actually that my current role is working in exploring social value in strategic land development. So that's really big projects looking at usually housing, usually residential for new communities. But the reason I ended up here is that in the summer I graduated from my PhD working with the nuclear industry, the nuclear decommissioning industry, and I was exploring social value of their sites which are being shut down. So it's at the end of decommissioning with nuclear sites, whenever that disappears, what happens to the land? They're going to have to redevelop it in some way. So yeah, it was, but then we also looked at the nuclear life cycle as a whole. What are the benefits that nuclear brings to society where they live and where the people who live around it, people who work in those sites, and also like larger scale, what nuclear brings to society. I've had a bit of a meandering journey to end up where I am because my undergraduate was actually in civil engineering. So I studied engineering and I liked engineering as a sector, but I didn't like the technical side of things at all. I liked the people and environmental side of things. So I think I'm a good example today that you might not exactly plan where you might end up, and you can move sideways into PhDs into different areas. So I went into project management, which is central to civil engineering, but obviously a bit different. And it took me a while to get there. But yeah, a bit of a slightly different story of taking a few years in between undergraduate and your PhD as well.
That's great. Yeah, I think we have some questions about that too. So yeah, as you can see, all vaguely nuclear related, but a nice diverse set of people in terms of where we come from and how we got into it. So are we starting with the Mentimeter slides, or are we doing some Q&A? Mentimeter slides?
Yeah, let's start with a bit of a Mentimeter.
Cool.
We're just going to get a bit of an idea about who we've got on our call today, because obviously you can see all of us, but we can't see you, and we don't know where you're all from. And we also just want to kind of gauge where everyone's at in terms of thinking about PhD and whether it's something for you. So if you could go to menti.com on your phone or on a different device, marvelous. And just pop in the code. Thank you. Interesting. It's good that there's lots of don't knows who've still come along. That's brilliant. That's kind of what we hoped for.
Yeah, I definitely think the don't know and the no are just as important as the yeses already, and I think hopefully you'll end up sitting in either the no or the yes category by the end of this hour. Nothing wrong with sitting in the no category as well. We're not gonna feel offended either. So
yeah, I think before my PhD I would have said no. So it's worth exploring options.
I did as well. Yeah.
Amazing. How many do we have on here? Is that the majority?
Yeah, we've got the majority in there.
No, that's great. Yeah, so a nice mix. Not everyone's super sold on it yet. Hopefully we won't turn anyone off, but hopefully we'll turn some people on or help them shift into the yes or the no by the end of it. Yeah, so that's nice, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with not knowing. I think I'm still not 100% sure, and I'm doing one, so there we go. Yeah, so do we have a question after this as well? I think we've got a couple just to have a gauge of a feel of you all. Yeah, so these are kind of what are your areas of interest, what backgrounds do you come from in terms of academically, etc., but also like what stuff do you find interesting, and yeah, there might be some trends, so yeah, you just type in whatever you fancy really, and it will start popping up. A nice
we got
mix.
some questions on there.
You can see a few friends there, people that said astronomy and planetary science. It's part of my undergrad degree.
I mean, that's great. That's a really wow. That's quite a broad mix, which is really good to see. Obviously, fusion being on there is very important for me, so I'm pleased to see that kicking about. But no, there's bags of different stuff, which is nice. All sorts. And when it comes to doing, I'm sure we'll go into it a bit later on, but very much having a broad field of interest is something that is just as important. I think a lot of people think maybe it's such a specialized thing that having broad interests aren't wanted, but I think yeah, I think it's definitely very important for what we end up doing, having a nice broad mix of interests, because it keeps your life more interesting as well. If the only thing, you know, you care and more interested in more things. Yeah, Max, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it might be a good time to introduce the idea of a CDT, because I did physics and I'm now doing material science, and a CDT, or Centre for Doctoral Training, is a great type of PhD course that allows you to transfer from a similar but not the same degree into a PhD of your choice. So you do modules in your first year. They take sort of various formats, but Emre and I are both on the fusion CDT, which, as you can probably imagine, focuses on nuclear fusion and gives you a good training in the types of knowledge that you'll need for and techniques that you'll need for your PhD.
Yeah, definitely, and they're quite common, especially I think we have quite a lot kicking about in Manchester, and yeah, it's a nice way of kind of having a structured entry into what is a quite unstructured 3.5-4 years. Having that initial structured entry gives you a bit of a grounding. It gives you a nice cohort. So obviously me and Max know each other through that, and it means that I can bug him with lots of questions about all sorts of stuff that I can't do, which is quite nice. And you have people in the above years who can, you know, pass down a bit of knowledge, which I think sometimes if you're just doing a PhD without that, you don't have necessarily the broad of people to ask. In an obvious sense, there are always people kicking about, but I think it's very clear who we can go talk to and who we have as points of contact for academic stuff, but also for maybe more, you know, if just stuff is feeling a bit difficult or things like that, like you have very clear points of contact within that. And I think that's one of the massive benefits of something like that, for sure. So yeah, great. I would think, I'm sure if you did this just with our CDT, it wouldn't maybe be quite as big, but you certainly have still a massively broad set of backgrounds. Obviously, neither me nor Max did material science. I know that Anika didn't either, and then Cara was saying that she also didn't. And then Laura, did you say that you did physics as well?
Yes, my undergrad degree started off as natural sciences, and I turned it into earth science with astronomy, is what it finally said on my certificate. And I've just kind of kept hopping through different subjects ever since, really, but all some sort of science related or engineering related thing.
No, I think that's nice, because then you get a broad set of skills and interests. But it does show that it doesn't really matter as much where you're coming from. It is, you know, a PhD is so much more than just the academic knowledge that you have in it. It's much more about how you handle what is quite a challenging 3 or 4 years, and rewarding but challenging too, and how you know what do you do when stuff goes wrong, or what do you do when how you kind of deal with challenges that are very individual to you, and how you use resources of people and resources of things to benefit your project. And I think that's much more important than if you know everything already, because A, that would be quite boring for you, and B, the chances are that you probably don't know everything already anyway. So I think it's much more important about who you are and your character over maybe necessarily your academic background, I personally would say. Should we get into some Q&A? Do we have?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of pre-submitted questions around funding and how to go about funding, and all of these will be covered in the presentation afterwards. So we'll look at a couple of other questions. So just as a reminder, you can use the question and answer box on the right hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar toolbar to ask any questions as we go along. But thank you so much to so many people who have already submitted questions. So some of the questions are quite specific, and I'll field them to Emery, who'll be able to give them to the right person. But we'll start off with a more general question. So someone has written in to say that they've not been able to get much experience during COVID. So how important is an impressive portfolio of experience when applying to a PhD?
Okay, so does anyone instantly want to take that one, or should I just pick one of you?
I'll go for that actually.
Go ahead.
That's okay. I think it really depends. Some PhDs that you apply to will be a lot more competitive than others. But I applied to a PhD which was fully funded, and it was already set out the question and the project for 4 years. And I think I was the only person who applied to it. So luckily my interests aligned with it, but I didn't necessarily have that much direct experience. And I think a lot of people end up coming directly from undergraduate into PhDs who maybe don't have much experience. But I think that's quite different in other countries. And that's my experience, what I've heard of in some European countries, and especially American PhD programs. I think they will ask for a lot more experience and evidence of things. But in my experience, I kind of lucked out and I didn't have that much.
Laura, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah. So when I look at applicants for PhDs that I'm supervising, I tend to look more for how interested you are in the project more than anything else. Cara's quite rightly pointed out, a lot of people come straight from undergrad. But for me, it's about matching up with someone who, well, one, I can work with, so sort of works in a similar-ish way to me, but also someone who's really willing to take the project on as their own and make their own thing out of it. And that comes from having an interest in it.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And it was interesting that neither of you said anything about having, you know, being top of your class or having massive academic ability. It is just about being really interested in a topic. And I think you're doing it for so long, if you're not interested at the beginning, you're certainly not going to be interested after 3.5 or 4 years doing it. Anika, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to echo as well what Laura and Cara said, one of the main things I also look for applicants is how they deal with problems when things don't go to plan, because it's very easy when everything's, you know, going exactly as it should do. But I want to see like how someone will respond when something isn't working, whether that's like an experimental problem or a modeling problem or just a general problem. How do you approach problems? I think that's one of the most important things for a lot of supervisors.
Definitely. And I can tell you now, stuff definitely goes wrong. So so you got to be prepared to deal with those bits as well, because yeah, they're going to come up a lot. No, really great. Thanks guys.
So there's another question that probably the whole panel will be able to answer in some shape or form. How to apply for a PhD, which is not in my original subject. I know that you've all covered this in your introductions and you all have experience of it, but do you have any top tips for anyone who's interested in applying for a PhD that they haven't originally studied?
Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, when I applied for mine, so my PhD was computational chemistry of polymers for carbon capture, which doesn't follow on at all from an undergrad in earth science with astronomy. Or from, I worked in the nuclear industry for a few years as well, so I didn't really follow on from that either. So I reached out to the supervisor and asked if I could have a chat with them about it. And they went through some of the skills they were after, and I said, oh, well, I can do these things. And it was that conversation that made the difference. So reach out to people and talk to them.
Definitely. Yeah, Max?
Yeah, another thing on this is on the CDTs really, is that most of them do open days throughout the year. Obviously, it won't be physical now, but it's a really good chance to see what PhD courses are being offered. So supervisors will advertise the PhD projects that they want a student for, and it's a really good chance to not only see what projects are there, but who the supervisors are. It's one thing that I hadn't really considered when I started looking was it's not just about the project, it's about your supervisor as well. As Laura said, you want a student if you're a supervisor who sort of works in a similar way, but also you want a supervisor. It works both ways. You want someone who you get on with, and also someone also who has the time. It might be all great having a supervisor is a you know 2-time Nobel Prize winner, but they might not have a lot of one-to-one time for you. So that's the other thing to consider.
No, very true, and nice, like, that you both mentioned it from the opposite side. I think that clearly shows as well that the supervisors are looking for the same thing. So going in and having a chat, supervisors want that as well as the student. And you just cold emailing a supervisor on a random Monday morning and having that chat, they're more likely to be interested in having you as a PhD student if they've chatted to you beforehand and they know these things, because it's clearly interesting. It's in the interest of someone like Laura who's supervising them and someone like Max who is a PhD student. It's something that you both want, and facilitating that in some way is always going to be really beneficial to your application. And if you say, you know, if you have a chat and they say all these skills, yeah, it might be in forgive me if I get it wrong, quantum chemistry when you come from earth sciences, but there's always going to be overlaps, especially if you stay within STEM. There's always overlaps, and it might not be the face value stuff of the project, but the deeper roots of how projects works and how science works in general are probably going to be consistent across a lot of them. And you'll be surprised how your skills can actually be applied from what you know already to something that might sound completely different. You probably have a lot more skills than I think you probably appreciate too.
Yeah, thank you. And there's another question here, again, a more general question. Is there anything that you think that the participants should do in preparation for the start of a PhD? So before you actually start going on to and dealing with the time management and the organisational skills, what did you do to sort of prepare yourselves for that journey?
I'll just say something little on it at the beginning, but I think it's really important they have a break. Whatever you're doing, especially if you're coming from undergrad, you probably, if you do that, then you have a summer or you have whatever, you have your time beforehand. It's okay for you not to take that time up all with reading textbooks after textbook after textbook. You're not a PhD student yet. You are still transitioning, and it's okay for you to have a little bit of time before starting something that is quite an undertaking. So yeah, I'd recommend maybe a holiday before you go. Yeah, I think Anika, you put your hand up as well. Max can say something.
It's definitely important to take a break from things. Once you've taken a break and you want to get into stuff, I'd say definitely get in touch with your supervisors and maybe ask them if they can recommend some reading, and just try and be really proactive. I think that's one of the main things. That's the big difference, you know, from undergrad to PhD level, is that you do have to be more proactive. You're leading a project essentially yourself. Even though you have a supervisor, it's your project at the end of the day, and you're responsible for that. So by showing an interest at the beginning and trying to find information of maybe training that you might want to do or literature you might want to read, I think that's a good place to start.
Definitely. Matt?
Yeah, so I took a year off after finishing my undergraduate. I didn't do a master's. I did a year in industry sort of instead. So it's also something worth emphasising is you don't necessarily need a master's to do a PhD. You can go straight from a bachelor's. And I don't, at least the people I spoke to at the time said that you don't even need that year in industry, but you do need to at least show some sort of skills that you've developed, or at least be able to talk about them. But yeah, I took a year off where I was just working on something completely unrelated. So I felt very unprepared when I was starting my PhD, but I just did a bit of side reading here and there, and it turned out to not actually be that useful. I think the main thing I think is not to panic about having forgotten things from your degree. For me, it was, I was worried about the maths that I might have to deal with. But especially when you're starting a CDT, you'll get that training before you start. If you're not, then yeah, as Anika said, be proactive. Get in touch with your supervisor. Ask what preparation you can do. It's a personal journey, but it's also a collaborative journey. And your supervisor is there not to hold your hand, but to work with you and support you.
Very true. And the supervisors want you to do well as well. If they have a bunch of rubbish PhD students, that's not good for them either. That's not enjoyable for them either. So you emailing them asking for a bunch of new material, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to give you more books than you can and you can even carry about. Laura, did you have something to say as well?
Yeah, one thing that's worth considering, so all of us are meeting online now, similar to this. You could always ask if you could join your supervisor's research group meetings before you actually start the PhD. You probably don't understand a lot of what's being talked about necessarily because you haven't started your research yet, but you'll get to meet people and you'll hear like the same words said again and again. And you can always have informal chats with the other people in the research group as well outside of that meeting. So you'll start building up those relationships and getting some sort of knowledge about the dynamics and the sorts of stuff you should be looking at.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we're all quite similar, that we didn't have to get used to new universities at the beginning of our PhDs, but I think for lots of people, actually, if you move to a new place, wonder about, find where things are, figure out what's the best bus route, and think like the real kind of like practical side of things with how you're going to do your PhD, I think helps you kind of get rid of some of your anxiety starting. So I didn't have that, and I actually knew my supervisor from my undergraduate quite well. The 2 years before my PhD, he'd been providing me with lots of references for jobs that I wasn't getting, so we were still in touch quite a lot, which was quite good. So then the thing I had to prepare for was the PhD itself, and in my first week of my PhD, I googled what is a PhD, because I didn't actually understand what a PhD was, and I think most students don't. So I think before you start, Google what is a PhD, and the thing you always come back to is like, you know, you have to have a novel piece of information. You're getting this tiny little piece of information on top of everyone else's knowledge, and kind of setting expectations up for yourself of what is actually going to be expected of you, and what the PhD process is going to look like. There's lots of forums online with all this information, which I found really helpful to help me kind of prepare for those months and months of confusion in your first year.
Definitely. And what is clear from that as well is you've completed the PhD and you were super confused and didn't know what it was like at the beginning. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to, you know, it's a super difficult undertaking. It is confusing at the beginning. It is tough. And that's okay. It's okay to feel all those things at the beginning. It's okay to feel a bit anxious about doing something. All of those things are okay. And you'd be surprised about how many other people are feeling it.
So it's actually worth pointing out that my dad is an academic. So I've grown up with someone in my family quite close who works at university and who's done research and has done a PhD. And I still didn't quite understand. I think lots of reading you do with a PhD doesn't really make sense, the advice you get, until you're maybe a year or two in, and then you reflect on it, and you can't quite explain to people what it's going to be like. So yeah, that confusion is something you have to just kind of get okay with having all the time.
Yeah.
Great. So our next question has 2 parts. So the first part is, what is the application process like for a PhD, which the panel can support with from their own experience? And then the second part is, what support is available in helping me apply for a PhD, which Vic and Elizabeth can probably answer.
Yeah, so for the first one, I mean, it does vary quite a lot as to what you're going through, but Laura, do you want to tell us about like your process? Then maybe you can help generalize it across, and then we could, maybe some of us could input how our experiences have been, if it varies.
Yeah, I think so the university has its online application system, which I think is it's separate to talking to the academic that has the position available. So it's a very formal form. I guess the careers people might be able to answer this better. They ask you lots of questions like, where's your funding coming from, and things like that, which your supervisor should have the answers to. So filling in that form is a lot of back and forth. But before you do that, normally you would have an interview with the supervisor and another academic at the university to assess whether you're suitable. And that interview is normally initiated. It differs on different programs, but often it's just from you emailing the supervisor and saying, I've seen this advertised. What do I need to do? Adverts are on things like findaphd.com. For the CDTs, they're advertised on the website, and you apply through the CDT coordinator, I think. So there are various routes to getting your application to the supervisor, who will then have an interview, and then you normally fill in the formal application form. Is how it's always worked for people with working with me.
Yeah, I think with the CDT, certainly with ours, mine and Max's, yeah, there's a place on the website that has all the projects, and then who you contact, and the form's very clear. And yeah, it's a very formal form. But with our Manchester application, we we applied for the studentship, and then the project came after. So we ended up getting the money, and they were like, you can basically do a project, and then that's when you go and you pick between the Manchester product. So it definitely varies across how it's done, but that is all set out and is very clear on the CDT websites. But also bear in mind, if the CDTs vary with which university they are, so ours is 5 different unis, they will also have their own specific applications, and that can get quite confusing. But there should be points of contact who are super helpful on all the CDT websites. Anika, did you want to say something?
No, yeah, it was just about the Fusion CDT application process, but I think you've covered most of it, so that's fine.
Max?
Yeah, so I actually applied for 5 different PhD projects. 3 of them were on the CDT that I'm now doing, and I was across 4 different universities as well. Yes, of those that all I interviewed for, they were the interview wasn't necessarily like a job interview. At least I found it was more of a chat and get to know where you are. Obviously, you'll submit a CV, or your supervisor that you're talking to will know what degree you've done, what experience you've got already. But yeah, the process varies massively. But essentially nowadays it's mostly a pipeline application form that you have to go through just to be sort of in the university. But the actual interview itself is more of a get to know your supervisor, or someone who might be your supervisor.
Yeah, and I definitely I applied for a couple of unis as well, and the questions that I ask you were quite varied across the places as well. And I think I really found from the application process the stuff that they value in you as a person and a PhD student also helps, you're choosing your university that you want to go to as well, and that's a really important side of it as well. But yeah, that's why I think I ended up staying in Manchester, because I like the way that how they thought about how we should be as PhD students. But yeah, it certainly does vary quite a lot, but all the websites of the CDTs will have very clear points of contact, and never harm in asking 2-3 more questions than you think are necessary. It's important that you really understand the application process. That's completely okay, and everyone knows it's kind of confusing, so that's also okay. Cara, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I guess just to give an example of how things might vary slightly. So like I said, I applied to a PhD, which the project was already funded and agreed and set up because it was an industry funded PhD. It's called an EPSRC ICAS award. So basically it's EPSRC and industry bodies fund the project, and then they get academic partners. So I did have their original conversation with the supervisor, like I said, I knew, and then I had to do a CV, I think cover letter, and maybe a really short research proposal. And with him, it was an informal chat, but then he went with me to the company. And at the company, I had more of a formalized interview process, which felt like a bit like a job interview. Well, I'm not sure if it was, I'm not sure if they felt it was like, but I felt like it was quite a serious interview. And then the same for my KTP, actually, that was advertised as a job role essentially. So like I said, KTPs are a slightly different route of doing research connected to universities. And that was, yeah, like I said, it was definitely like a job interview. It was done during the pandemic, so it was done virtually, but it was a bit different. But they were, I guess, like the same idea kind of stuff, that they were trying to find people who they gelled with quite well. They want to make sure they had the right mindset, even if it was a slightly more formalized process.
Cool. Nika?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add one more thing, that sometimes for some interviews, people might ask you to prepare like a presentation or write a piece of work beforehand as well. Again, just to try and see how you approach problems and how you think about things. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because depending on the supervisor or the scheme, they might ask for something like that.
We've got quite a lot of questions, so to get through as many as possible, maybe we'll just have one person give like a shorter answer to each one, because we've got absolutely loads. So the next question is for one of the panelists, what advice would you have for someone who wants?
Sorry, yeah. I think Elizabeth just had something to add.
Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Sorry, just I spotted that on that kind of Wordle, there was several people who are looking at humanities PhDs, and the application process is quite different. For science and technology and engineering, generally got something which is an advertised either project or a CDT, and you apply. Whereas if you're going to go for something which is specifically arts, but even sometimes in the social sciences, you very rarely get an advertised PhD. What you have to do is come up with your own research proposal in conjunction with a potential supervisor. So it's a much more kind of complicated process, and you have to be a real kind of drive it yourself. So yeah, just be a little bit aware that it's not always the same outside the sciences. Sciences have it kind of. So,
and I've just popped it. Thank you, Elizabeth. I've popped in the chat that should be that everyone should be able to view. I've put in a couple of links that will be useful. We've got a webinar coming up tomorrow, which is called Becoming an Academic. The link to register is in there. I'm presuming that Elizabeth, you might have something to do with that session.
That's going to be Monday, I think. Hopefully it's not tomorrow, otherwise it's not going to be ready.
No, I tell her it is. It's Monday. Sorry, it is. It's Monday. And also, we do have a dedicated careers site which is specifically for academic careers, and I've put the link to that in there as well, because that covers everything quite comprehensively. So that's just in addition to the advice that you've had today.
I would also say on that one, Vic. It's probably about to be retired, is that website. So get in quick before I close it down at Christmas. I'll be stealing most of the stuff that I wrote and putting it on the PhD part of the Career Service website, though. So it's not going to be gone, just updated.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Lovely. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, we'll try and get through as many as we can, but there are a lot. So what advice would you have for someone who wants to do a PhD but isn't quite sure which area? So how do you go about research and which PhDs you might be interested in? Would someone like to?
No one to take that.
I guess maybe I could do that. Because it kind of works that like I say, I wasn't set that I wanted to do a PhD, but when I came out of civil engineering in my undergraduate, I knew I liked working in the area of civil engineering, but I didn't want to be an engineer, and that was really difficult trying to find like the right mixture of things. So I spent a couple of years getting some work experience in working in renewable energy, and it kind of worked for me, but kind of didn't work for me. And I kind of applied to a PhD previously. I didn't really do it very well, and I didn't get much feedback on that, so it didn't go the best. But it was kind of, I think, about keeping your eye out for options that came up. And then when my project did come up, the reason I went for it was that it wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do, but it had a few of the tick boxes that kind of worked for me. It was about people, it was kind of about waste management, and it was in the technology engineering sector. So I think it was just kind of keep my eyes open for opportunities. And I find a PhD is really good for that. It's like going through a list of projects and thinking, actually, that one sounds kind of interesting, which helps you narrow your focus. Like we've said, that might be different for PhDs where you have to come up with a research topic yourself. If that had been me, I wouldn't have done a PhD because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had to kind of put myself into someone else's project. And I think that's okay. I think you can find an academic that you want to work with, and if they have a real strong interest, go down their route if you just like research generally. But otherwise, it is quite a challenge. I guess trying to get a Venn diagram of all your interests and figure out what sits in the middle.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, what would reviewers like to see on the statement of interest or cover letter for a PhD position? So any tips on what to put into that?
Can I pick on Laura again or Anika, who supervise? No, either one of you, I think would be really good to.
Yeah, feel free to add Laura as well, but make sure you've done your research. I think that's the main thing. So make it specific to the project you're applying to. There's no point sending the same cover letter out to all like 5 different PhD projects. The supervisor wants to see you're interested in their area and you've done your research on that topic, even if you weren't an expert before, just to show that you've looked into it a bit is really important. And then again, to kind of just demonstrate what your skills are and how they're relevant to the project you're applying for. I think that's one of the most important things.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, what are your thoughts on spending some time working in between an undergraduate or master's and a PhD? Does that help to sort of bring some clarity to what you want to do for a PhD, having that work experience?
I think Max or Cara, yeah, Max.
Yeah, for me, it was. I think it was essential. I kind of went 150 miles an hour into my final year of my undergraduate. I just wanted to get the best, the most out of it and the best grade. That's just me. I'm not saying that's what everyone should do, but I found that I wasn't going to have time basically to apply to find a PhD and apply for one. So yeah, for me, taking just some time off to work, not necessarily working in something relevant, I was mostly tutoring, was a really good opportunity to clear my head and spend a good amount of time actually finding the right PhD, finding the right supervisor, finding the right university.
Great, thank you.
It's okay not to rush, take your time. If the PhDs are always going to be there, and if your ideal project isn't there first time round, there are 1,000,001 things to do. So just never rush these things. Take your time.
Thank you. And does anyone have any advice or suggestions on researching PhDs abroad?
Did anyone have a look into that here? I didn't massively for mine, but I imagine as some people alluded to earlier, the processes do vary a lot across different countries. So I think as much advice as us as PhD and ex-PhD students can give, that's going to be very specific to the UK. And I wonder if there's stuff in the career service that has abroad bits, because I think it does vary so much. So I'd be prepared for it to be quite different, I imagine.
Can I just quickly suggest most of my knowledge comes of different PhDs, different countries' PhDs programs is kind of through social media. Actually, on Reddit, there's a really active PhD forum, and people on there kind of explain to you what the different processes are for applying and for doing the PhD itself. And actually, that's the best thing I've seen if you don't have actual contacts in those countries.
Great, thank you. So what to consider when choosing a research topic? So what was most important for you in choosing where and what to do your PhD? Was it the group, the PI, research area, career prospects, work-life balance, how many hours of work you do each week?
Anika?
I would say the supervisor is the most important thing to look at when you're choosing a PhD, because as people have mentioned before, even if it's like the most interesting topic and it looks like the best thing in the world, you have to make sure that your supervisor has time for you, as Max mentioned, and that you get on with them, because it's a really weird relationship. There's no other relationship in the world like between a supervisor and their student. So you need to make sure that you'll get on well with each other. So I recommend talking to people who have worked with a supervisor or other members of the group, just to see what it's like, because not everyone fits with each other, and I think that's one of the most important things, because you're with them for like 3 or 4 years. So it can either make your life very easy or very difficult. So I'd say that's the most important thing.
Thank you. And what is the selection process like for applying to a CDT?
I can say something here. So again, it varies from CDTs, but for our CDT, the Fusion one at Manchester, normally people do an application, which is like a CV, a cover letter, and then their grades. So normally there is a minimum grade requirement, I think, for a 2-1 for our CDT. And as long as you meet those basic criteria for doing the PhD, then we'll have an interview day, and then we interview the candidates. And for us, it's like we choose the best 2 or 3 candidates depending on the funding we have that year, and then they can choose what project they want to do. But it varies. Some people apply for specific projects as well. But I guess the processes are similar in terms of you have an interview, cover letter, CV, those kind of things.
Yeah, for the green CDT, I think it's similar, but you do apply for a specific project, and you can apply for multiple projects in the green CDT, but you still have to have those individual interviews with the supervisors.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Do you have any tips for someone who's thinking of going straight from an undergraduate to a PhD, so missing out the masters?
Yeah, I did that. So I guess I'll say, I mean, apart from earlier, that you should definitely have a break, and it's very important. The second thing is, go to, especially if you're at Manchester, there's a really great talk on imposter syndrome at the beginning of doing a PhD, and imposter syndrome is something that I think a lot of PhD students feel, and I think that can be exacerbated when you don't have a master's, and maybe at the beginning you're going to feel a bit like you don't have the knowledge. But I think the best tips to give you is that there's a reason why you're there when you're going. They selected you because they think you have the skills to, even if you might not think you have the skills to. And I think just keeping that at the core of, even if you're feeling a bit intellectually inferior to some people who've done some super amazing things and done some really interesting things that you might not have done, you're all there having got there on merit. There's nothing that's got you there for any other reason apart from who you are and how you did an interview and the grades that you have, etc. And you will still be able to do it, because else they wouldn't have put you in that environment to fail, because no one wants you to fail. So, Elizabeth.
Just to let you know that for some subjects, it is kind of almost essential to have a master's. Again, in the arts and humanities, it'd be very unusual to go into a PhD without a master's, or to go into one of these 1+3 programs, where essentially kind of bundles up a master's with a PhD, but as kind of like two bolted together packages rather than just one PhD. It's almost getting a little bit that way in life sciences as well now, where we're getting people who've done an undergrad and a master's who are the most competitive for going in even to the 4-year PhDs, which is unfortunate. 4-year PhDs were set up so that you would ideally be able to go in from an undergraduate, but if you don't get in first time round from an undergraduate degree, then do consider the right kind of master's with enough research content, which will then hopefully make you more competitive for the next time round.
Great, thank you. Does it matter if you apply for PhDs at only one university, or would you recommend casting your net a bit further?
I don't think it matters either way. I think if it's projects that you're interested in and you maybe know the city well or know the people at the university, that's great. But also bear in mind there are lots of really great institutions kicking about with some really interesting people. So there's nothing wrong with sending a few extra emails to people in other places, because yeah, every university has their specialties and they can offer some really interesting things for sure. And if you don't get into the top whatever ones, you might find yourself at those places anyway, collaborating, doing all sorts, using their equipment. Like institutions are happy to share around a lot more stuff than you think. Nothing's quite as guarded as I think people might assume. You probably might end up in somewhere really cool that you applied to, even if you're at a different university. So yeah, cast your net as wide as you want, and don't worry so much.
Great. So I know, Emma, you've got your presentation. Do we have time for one more question?
I think, yeah, if we go to 5-2, I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So someone's asked to the whole panel, everything that you know now about PhDs and your workload and your research and the challenges that you faced, in hindsight, looking back to when you started your PhD, would you make the same decision? Would you still want to do a PhD knowing everything that you know now?
That's a great question. Anyone? Max, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think I would. If I'd known there was going to be a pandemic on, then definitely. It's actually weirdly been got some welcome security, and a PhD, at least in science. I can't speak for humanities, but it gives you access to this incredible suite of people and equipment and facilities that, I mean, you're essentially in a playground, and you can't necessarily do whatever you want, but you have a lot of freedom in how you do it. So yeah, I would thoroughly recommend it. And even now, with all of the stuff that I've been through, all the things that have gone wrong, I think it's still worth it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think if I knew then what I knew now, I think Anika's point about figuring out if you can work with that supervisor is really important. And you might find it quite difficult to answer that question at the start, no matter how many people you talk to. And I guess you also have to think about, like, well, you probably will need to be really independent, and how does that match with what your supervisor wants to do? Like, do you want to take your research in one direction and they think that's wrong, and then how do you manage that relationship? So I wish I understood better how to manage relationships at the start of my PhD, I think.
I'll chip in something. I would say definitely. I think you hear a lot of the horror stories of PhDs, how it's the most stressful thing you'll ever do in your life and how it's incredibly demoralizing, and you kind of have to face up to criticism constantly for 4 years. It is difficult. It is definitely a huge challenge. But if you have a good supervisor who doesn't work you way too hard and you don't have really big issues trying to get into physical labs, I did qualitative research, so I was completely in control of my diary and when I worked. I probably won't ever have 4 years again that I'm so in control of what I want to do. And a PhD is an incredibly selfish experience, actually. And for 4 years, you don't really answer to an employer other than your supervisor, but you can kind of ignore them if you want. So, I mean, you shouldn't, but by the end of it, you should be able to argue back and do what you think is best at you rather than them. So don't fully ignore them. But yeah, as much as people tell you it's difficult, I think a PhD in ways has a lot more freedom than a 9-to-5 job would have. So that's why I think it was definitely worth doing it, even if at times I did cry in the toilet. It was worth it.
Yeah, I think just to quickly add to what you said, my PhD was computational, so I could work wherever, whenever, as long as I could access the computational facility. Whereas people that worked in the lab had to come in at like 2 in the morning because there's the only time they could get instrument time. So if work-life balance is important, you might want to consider that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. I think we're going to have to draw the Q&A to a close at this point, just so that we can cover some really vital things in our kind of final presentation. But thank you to everyone who has asked a question. I'm sorry we couldn't get through absolutely everything, and thank you so much to the panel for all of your honest and thorough answers. And Ray, shall I just hand over to you to just go through some kind of vital bits of info for everybody?
Yeah. So this is just a few slides at the end to kind of sum up maybe a little bit more of the application process. I think you guys will be able to download these slides from the handout section somewhere on GoToWebinar, wherever that might be. I think
you can download this now.
Amazing. So just a bit about where to find out about PhDs. So I'm going to go through 3 vaguely pretty different types. So CDT, Max mentioned it right at the beginning. So what we do is a Centre for Doctoral Training. They're usually 4-year programs, fully funded. Some include the initial master's year, so that's what Elizabeth was saying about the 1+3. They all include some kind of taught course at the beginning, and that's really great for a structured introduction to a subject. Some of these might include some industrial collaboration as well. But yeah, there's a really great link on the Manchester website that has just everything about all the CDTs that you have here at Manchester, and they're all split up into EPSRC, so a lot of the sciencey ones, all the way to the different humanities CDTs and things like that. And so that's all on the Manchester website. So that's a really great resource. And then we have the next one, which is just a PhD studentship. So it's a studentship is your the money that you get to do your work, so that'll be your salary included and your tuition fees and stuff like that. And that's a lot of people that I've spoken to. It's about 3.5 years of funding these things. They're not part of a CDT, but it's still a project that you get with someone, and you have the less of the structure at the beginning without the teaching. Still probably can do some kind of industrial collaboration within that. And websites to just find a PhD are just super useful for things like that, and a lot of the CDT bits are included on those too, but it's just less. It might be the CDT section is going to show you exactly which are just the CDT ones. Then find a PhD is really great for just PhDs in general. I put go talk to your professors on there, because having a chat with your professors is going to be super important. That's how a lot of people end up finding their PhDs, or just find out about other people who are doing PhDs they might be interested in. So that's a really cool thing to do. And then the next one, I don't know a lot about self-funding. It's less common for UK students in STEM because we have a lot more of the CDTs and kind of the studentship-based systems, but it can be done. And there are some really great blog posts on Find a PhD about that. Even just reading a few of those, I learned a lot about how to self-fund a PhD. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world, but I think it's definitely doable, and I think it's something that yeah, sorry, Elizabeth, do you want to chime in with this more, because I don't know loads about it. So.
Okay, just to point out that again, particularly in the humanities, it's not unusual to do part-time PhD. So you might be working part-time and using that to fund your PhD. And they've also brought in doctoral loans. Now that's kind of on the same basis as undergraduate loans, so you do have to pay them back, but they're kind of slightly easier than commercial loans to pay back, and you don't have to pay them back until you reach a certain level of salary. But you know, you'd have to be extremely sure of yourself to try to fund a whole PhD from a doctoral loan. But you know, they're there to help top up maybe some part-time working or other funds.
Yeah, no, and yeah, part-time work is yeah, I know quite a few people even in STEM who end up doing part-time PhDs. So there is a very broad, the options of doing them. There are lots of different ways of doing them, and it's just finding the one that fits right with you. And then the next bit I think is just really important, because I don't think I keep getting asked by my friends if I have to pay back my PhD studentship. So I just wanted to make it very clear that you do get a salary and you get a monthly thing, and it's not, the money you get isn't something you have to pay back later, unless obviously you take out a doctoral loan. The current one this year is 15,285 quid, tax free, which we're all getting. Well, me and Max are all getting this year, and it is, especially for someone like Manchester, it's sufficient to I still have a pretty good life doing what I'm doing. It's not, a crazy amount of money, but it's a proper salary, and it's not anything you have to pay back. And I just want to make that very clear, because I keep getting asked if I have to pay all this money back. So I thought I'd tell you guys too. And you have other paid opportunities, so graduate teaching assistant, which is basically where you can either take labs or you can take tutorials, and they're all paid. And then widening participation and other kind of outreach stuff, some of that's paid as well. And then do we have a final one on what's going on in the careers service? Oh, this is my top tips, sorry. So my top tips, just email. People are usually super happy to chat. If someone's doing something you're interested in, just drop them an email. No one really minds. People are usually pretty chatty. Ask all the questions you want. As I say, it's a long undertaking. There's no reason to go in without all the facts. And yeah, meet the research group. It's been made pretty clear by a lot of people here, but it's really important what the supervisor's like, and chatting to the other students who have dealt with the supervisor, but also like what they're like. Are they a sociable group? All those kind of things that might be important to you, and just chatting to as many people as you can, because everything's pretty specific. So yeah, I think that's all I've got, unless is there.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Emery. We're running over a tiny little bit, so I'll be really, really brief. This is just a couple of slides just telling you about the support that's available from the Career Service. There we go. So this is the website that I mentioned before that Elizabeth said is relocating. So as we said, these are available as a handout. So if you can download that, again, it's from the panel on your right hand side. Go to handouts and then click on the document, and you can download it from there or use the QR code. But this is the website that's all about academic careers, tells you everything you can need to know. There is a postgrad study fair, and this has institutions from all over the country. That's on the 17th, which is next Tuesday. So again, in the chat, there's the link to register for the Elizabeth webinar on an academic career, which is on Monday. So you could really max out, have this today, that on Monday, and then go to the postgrad study fair on Tuesday. And by Wednesday, you should know exactly what you're doing with your life. So that's on there. You can find that on the Career Service website. If you go to the Career Service website and search postgrad study fair. You can make a one-to-one appointment if you want to. You can speak to Elizabeth, Jenny, or myself. We also have Delia Goodwin, who is our careers consultant for disabled students. So in case that there's anyone on the call who would benefit from that, she and I can offer 60-minute appointments instead of 30 minutes for students who have disabilities. And you can, in case we have any graduates on the call, you can access one-to-one appointments and all aspects of the career service for 2 years after you graduate. And you can get all that information via our website and on Careers Link. Here's all our social media, and we can leave that one up if you want to continue to follow us. Please do. if anyone has anything that they wish to finish with. But I'll just say thank you to all attendees for coming along today. I really hope you found it useful. Thank you so much to everybody for taking the time out to answer so many questions. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, guys. It was really enjoyable.
Lovely, that's great. So you are, as attendees, you are free to leave now. If you don't forget to download the handout before you go, if you do want access to these slides. There's also information on there about the members of the panel, in case you wanted to connect with them on LinkedIn, keep up to date with what they're doing. But yeah, thank you very much for everyone's participation this afternoon. And I'll give it 1 minute to let people download their handouts, and then I'll close the webinar down. Thanks, everyone.